Well, has anyone else done this week? What's this, you might be asking? For those of you who don't sit and work on a computer a lot, this is the key thing. This week I sat down at the beginning of the week on Monday and I start preparing for today and I realised I'm going to need to make a new folder to store all my sermons for 2021 because I organise things by year. Does anyone else do that? Of course you do, all right? All sensible people do that. So you're kind of looking at your computer and going, oh wow, the 2020 folder had so much interesting stuff in it, didn't it? I mean, it doesn't matter what you're thinking about. 2020, that was an interesting year. But now we've got this new folder and we're just starting to put stuff into it. And it's like, oh, well, it's kind of all ahead of us. And so this is a time of year where we're starting to think, well, what are we wanting to put into our folder called 2021? What do we want it to look like? What kind of people do we want to be in 2021? We're starting to think New Year's resolutions and change of lifestyle and all that kind of stuff. But it's a bit of a dangerous time if you're a follower of Jesus. You know why? Because when we start thinking about what we'd like our year to look like, what we'd like it to contain, and the kind of person that we even want to be, like, I'd like to be healthier this year, I'd like to work on my fitness, I'd like to spend more quality time with the people who are important to me, I'd like to learn a new skill. Last year, around this time, a lot of people were thinking, oh, I'd love to travel, but maybe a few of us this year are like, I just don't even want to go there. But whatever it is that we're thinking about, the danger is that we'll get into the very, very deceptive practice of life hacking. You know, just looking for those little tweaks to make life better, make it simpler, make it more effective, make ourselves happier, make us better at what we do, whatever it might look like. And on one level, that's fantastic. It's great to kind of tweak and improve things. But as Paul was sharing earlier, if you're a follower of Jesus, we're not about improving our lives bit by bit. We're not even all that interested in these marks on the calendar which says, right now it's a brand new me. We're actually involved in the day-by-day process of being made completely new. In fact, of dying to our old way of living and living a whole new kind of life. And we're not kind of twiddling our thumbs and going, what is it that I would like for this year? We're actually saying to God, would you reveal what you want for me this year? Would you reveal what you want me to do today? Lord, would you show me what you want me to do with this situation right now? That's actually what the Christian journey is all about. So we want to be really careful as we launch into the new year that we don't do it according to the pattern of the world, the way that we are just used to seeing it talked about and hearing it talked about and kind of engaging in our schools or our workplaces or wherever we do that stuff. We actually want to approach it from a Christian way of thinking, which is to say we are constantly being made new. So what we're doing today is no different to what we do every other time we gather. We explore how is God wanting to make us new as followers of Jesus, make us more like himself, make us less like who we are without him and more like who we can only be in him. That's the exciting adventure that we get to be on together. So the real question is not what do I want for 2021 or even what kind of person do I want to be this year. The real question is what does God want for me? And if you were here last week, you'll know that that's a brilliant question to ask because when we stop living by the pattern of this world and start living the way that God asks us and calls us to live, what we discover that his will for us is actually good and pleasing and perfect. It's actually better than what we would have been trying to achieve for ourselves. It's actually what he wants to give us because of his grace if we would just listen and follow him. And that's the journey that we want to be on. So we're going to think a little bit today about what is it that we actually want our year to be like, not based on what we might fantasize about, dream about, speculate about, whatever, but on the basis of what God says would be awesome for us. And as I look at the Bible and as I look at how it speaks into communities of people who are following Jesus, I see three themes over and over again. And at Kingsley, we've expressed them like this: love, share, and grow. When we think about the we that we want to be as a group of people, what do we want for this year? We want to be people who love, we want to be people who share, we want to be people who grow. Because that's what the Bible says to communities of Christians over and over again. It starts with love, moves into how we share with one another, and the result is how we grow together. And so for 3 weeks, we're going to think about how these 3 ideas are applied in one particular church situation to the church that's in Corinth. And especially in chapters 12 to 14 of 1 Corinthians, we see these ideas come out in a way that's really helpful for us. So we're going to launch into that today, beginning with that first word, love. And if you were going to turn anywhere in the Bible to read about love, where are you probably going to think of? Yeah, you're going to think of 1 Corinthians 13. So if you've got that in your Bible, flick to 1 Corinthians 13. We're going to step through it, and we're going to focus very much on the big picture of what's going on in the story. So we're not going to answer every single question about every single verse that's in this chapter. We're going to stick with what's the vibe, if you're a fan of the castle. What's the big idea of what God is saying in this passage about the kind of community he wants us to be. So let's launch into what we can learn about love, because really, isn't this the kind of community that we want? Don't we want to be a part of a community where we know that we are loved and we have an opportunity to love others, and that we're, as a result of that, we're sharing our lives deeply and we're growing closer to God and to one another? Let's launch into how Paul addresses that topic from 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 1. Now, if you're familiar, and for those of you who've got a Bible open, all you've got to do is look back to the previous sentence, and what Paul says is, right, now I'm going to show you the most excellent way. That's what he introduces this chapter with, and this is how he gets into it. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Or if I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And if I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. So he's kind of starting out on a negative train, but he really wants us to understand this right from the outset. If you do not have love, and if what you do does not come from love, then you achieve nothing, you are nothing, and you gain nothing. Like that's a pretty drastic way of saying it, isn't it? But as he's writing to these people in Corinth, this is kind of surprising stuff for them, because when you look at what they're actually doing in community with one another, these things have become really quite important. For some of them, coming along to their gatherings and having these ecstatic worship experiences is fantastic. They love doing that. For some of them, being able to speak authoritatively and have people listen to them is a great thing to be engaged in. For others, surrendering their assets and possessions so that people notice them and notice all of the great things that they do on behalf of others. And they might even be thinking, well, you know what, I'm laying up treasures in heaven. You know, I'm giving away all this stuff. God must be really pleased with me. It's not coming from love, it's coming from self-interest. But they're looking at that stuff and saying, oh, look at that guy. What a generous person. Funnily enough, in a city not far from Corinth, there was actually a monument to a man who followed another religion, and he set himself on fire as an act of devotion to his God. And they made this monument about, you know, what a great reward he would get into, you know, his idea of heaven, because he was so devoted and sacrificed himself to the flames. It's like people thought that was radical. But it didn't come from love. It actually came from, how can I get myself ahead? How can I get a better eternity? How can I get a better reputation in this life? It was coming all from self-interest. And what Paul's saying, doesn't matter what it looks like, whether it's ecstatic worship or authoritative teaching or great acts of service and sacrifice, if that stuff isn't coming from love, don't celebrate it. Don't make a big deal out of it. In fact, recognize that that's not doing any good for that person. You know, they might be feeling like in the moment it's great, but when you're caught up in just serving yourself when you come together, well, take that moment away, you've actually achieved nothing. And you might be really laying down the law and telling people what they need to hear, but if it's not coming from love, you're actually hollow. That word for you know, I am nothing, it means you're hollow. There's no substance to you. And no matter what you give up in the hopes of getting ahead, if it's not coming from love, God's not going to reward that. You're not actually achieving anything. So people need to understand that what they've invested in is thinking, these are the things that matter. Paul's saying, you know what? When you think of the things that matter most to you in community with each other, most of what you guys get excited about isn't really that important. And he goes on to contrast it with this. Love is patient. And love is kind, and it doesn't envy, and it doesn't boast, and it's not proud. It It's not rude and it's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered and it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil but rejoices with the truth. And it always protects and always trusts and always hopes and always perseveres. And that is a brilliant list of attributes to have in community with other people, don't you reckon? And there's a reason that it's often read at very significant events where we're focusing on our relationships with others, because these are brilliant attributes. But you know what, it occurred to me as I was reading through that again this week, this was never meant to be an exhaustive list. Like you were never meant to go to 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7 and say, right, this is what love is. This is the big picture, this is all that it is. Because it's not. Love is massive. This is a sampling of the sort of stuff that love produces. And it's a brilliant sampling. And I reckon it's a really valuable exercise to spend some time and actually think through each one of those and go, right, what does that look like in my life? That's a brilliant thing to do. But here's the thing that I want you to recognize today. Don't think that this is all God has to say about what love can look like in community with people. As you actually go back through the letter of 1 Corinthians, and again, this is a really cool thing to do if you want to do it later on. If you print out these verses about what love actually looks like in community, and then if you go back to the very beginning of 1 Corinthians, which was a letter written in response to a whole lot of issues that they were struggling with, and you look at how Paul deals with the problems that they were experiencing in community, that list is the opposite of what their reality was. So where they had infighting and where they had competition and where they had people holding on to resentments and taking each other to court and indulging in immoral practices and all these sorts of things, if you have that list next to you, you realize, oh, that is the opposite of what they were experiencing. And they needed to understand this is what God calls us to, not what they were currently engaged in. Love is the perfect expression of community life. That's what we long for. Believe me? Yeah. So stop and think about whatever the barriers to true community are in your life. Where are things not going great in connection with others? Where are the pressure points in your relationships with God and with other people? The answer to all of them is love. And it'll take different forms. In some cases, it might be a great deal of patience that's required. In some cases, it might be remembering to not keep a record of wrongs. In some cases, it means stop doing some of the things you were doing with people, because love doesn't enjoy evil and it doesn't enjoy doing sinful stuff with people. Instead, love rejoices in the truth. As you think about all of the relationship challenges you have, the answer to some of those might be up there, but there may be other things that you need to hear as well that are found in different parts of the Bible. For example, carrying each other's burdens, and in this way you'll fulfill the law of Christ, which is the law of love. So maybe what God's calling you to do in this moment is to realize, you know what, there are some people around me that need a helping hand, and I need to be that person who steps up, because that's what love's asking of me in this circumstance. There are different circumstances, different challenges that we all face in different seasons of life. Love is the answer to what God asks of us in those moments. And love is what our souls really hunger for in community with other people. Now, do you believe me? Who was it that did Love Is All You Need? Was that the Beatles? Da, 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 love is all. Yeah, that's right. Glad you're here. No one else knew. Who's the Beatles? I heard from over this side of the room. Anyway, is it true that love is actually the answer to all the dilemmas of community? That love is the ultimate expression of community? That's really what we want to experience. Well, verse 8 says this: love never fails. So the answer is yeah. All you need is love. Now, it's going to take a whole bunch of different forms, and we need some guidance in how to love, but love is actually what we need. But, in contrast, where there's prophecies, they'll cease. Where there are tongues, they'll be stilled. Where there's knowledge, it'll pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. And when I was like a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. Now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Love never fails. Love is what we need in order to experience the community life that we are actually longing for at the start of 2021. And as we get to the end of 2021, if we can say that we've lived in love, that's when we'll say, you know what, it's been a great year. Doesn't matter what's happened in our circumstances, no matter what our personal challenges has been, love is what really counts. It's the we want to be. We want to be a community of love. And Paul's been talking to these guys about some of those things they were focusing on, and he's pointing out, hey, guys, you need to stop being childish in the way you think about community life together. So you're all thinking about, hey, when we get together, what's my idea of a great church service? Oh, it's when I get to exercise this ecstatic gift of tongues in worship, or it's when I get to get up and tell people what they need to hear, or it's when I can show people how generous I've been, or whatever it might be, but it's all about me. And what he's saying is, look, stop being childish, because when you're a child, you think the universe revolves around you. You go through that stage. Parents, anyone had kids who have kind of moved through that stage? Didn't last long, that stage, but it was there. And not only do you tend to think that life is all about you, but you tend not to be able to think down the track of where your choices are going to take you. And you need a parent in your life, or a carer, or an older sibling, or just somebody who can help you figure out that your choices are going to have certain consequences. And so there's a certain amount of protecting that happens, and then a certain amount of, okay, I'm going to give you some freedom so you can figure that stuff out for yourself, because you need to see where your choices are taking you. And Paul's kind of doing that for the Corinthians. He says, look, stop being childish when you think about how you engage in community. Think about where your choices are taking you. When you make your gatherings all about you, what do you think that church community is going to be like in a year, 5 years, 10 years' time? Are you going to be cohesive? Are you going to be being built up by one another? Are you going to be glorifying God? No, it's going to be competitive, it's going to be divisive, people are going to drift away, it's just going to be a mess. So why are you focusing on that stuff instead of the thing that will actually bind you together and create a community that will be a taste of eternity? You know, what's going to endure? Love is going to endure. Love is a taste of heaven here on earth. So give yourselves a preview of heaven. Invest in love. And whether you're experiencing ecstatic worship, or exercising the gift of prophecy, or being generous with your finances, or sacrificially serving, whatever it actually looks like, because it's coming from love, it'll be awesome. But stop being childish and thinking that you can pursue your own agendas and that it's not going to have destructive consequences in your community and in your life. Now, to be honest, there's a bit of an element in most of us where we find ourselves doing some of the things that the Corinthians were doing and making life all about ourselves and not really looking down the path of where our choices are going to take us. For example, when I left home, I was 17. I just turned 17, moved to Perth to go to uni, and I was asked fairly early on if I would teach a Sunday school class. And I said yes. Why did I say yes? Anyone know? I'll tell you why. Because it feels good to be wanted, doesn't it? Like when people look at you and say, you know, you could teach a Sunday school class, Mike, you know the Bible pretty well, and you're a very giving young guy, and we can trust you with these grade 6 and 7 students. I don't know what planet they were on when they made that decision, but anyway, that's what they did. So it kind of, if I'm honest and I look back, the reason I said yes was because it felt really good to be trusted, to be asked to be involved, to feel like you're part of the core team. I'm one of the teachers. I feel like I'm moving ahead in life. It felt like I was actually becoming a part of the fabric of the group, and they're not bad things. When we serve, we actually do get the payoff in that sense of being involved and knowing that people trust us with ministry and all those sorts of things. But they're not the reason to do it. And it would have been really nice if, as I met the kids, I really developed a love for them. And what would I do as a teacher if I had a deep love in my heart for these year 6 and 7 students that I was teaching in Sunday school? Well, I might be praying for them during the week. I might be making a phone call and checking up on them. I might be taking an interest in what their interests were, so that when I saw them on Sundays, I could say, hey, how did you go in your netball game? Or how did that test go? Or whatever it might be. I might be thinking really creatively about the lessons. How can I really stir the imagination of these kids to engage with the Bible and see how awesome it was? But to be honest, that's not the kind of teacher I was. I was the kind of teacher who'd kind of rock in, what's the lesson? And just kind of last minute, because my heart wasn't actually doing it out of love for them. It was actually about how I wanted to be seen as part of the church community. Does that make sense? And sometimes we've got to actually look at where's our stuff coming from. Sometimes it's where's our service coming from. And sometimes it's where's our lack of connection coming from? Because how it looks is going to be different for everybody. But what Paul's calling the people here in Corinth to is say, hey, let's look at your heart. Let's remember who God is and what he's done for us in Jesus and the love that he has for us. And let's see if that love might not melt our hearts so that we want to love God in return and love others the way that he's loved us. And as we're doing that, then let's see where that takes us. Let's see what gifts God might give us to use to be a blessing to others. Let's see what opportunities we have to serve them. Let's just see if we can actually orient it around love first and see whether in doing that God actually creates life in ways that doing Sunday school the way I was doing it probably didn't. That's kind of the calling of 1 Corinthians 13. The calling that we have as Christians to live in communities of love. Now, this could really easily sound like a guilt trip because the way our culture is kind of set up is that it kind of gives you the power to pursue your own happiness. And you're kind of in charge of that. So don't commit to anything, that whole FOMO thing. You know, I'll make decisions based on what I think will make me happy and achieve my goals in life. And we kind of have this feeling like that's how life needs to work. Whereas what God says is, no, die to that garbage. You can do that all you want. It's not going to make you happy and it's not going to lead you to the place where you think you're going to go. Instead, as you die to self and live for me, I will actually give you a life which is really satisfying. Have you experienced the truth of that in your own life? Have you experienced what it's like to give, not because of what you'll get out of the experience of giving, but just because you wanted to love the person you were giving toward? You've all done that, haven't you? Have you experienced, even if it's as a kid, doing the dishes or cleaning your room, just because you know mum or dad or whoever you live with is going to get a buzz out of it? We know what it's like just to want to do something to bless somebody else. And isn't that the kind of person that you want to be? You know, that moment when you were doing that, that's what you want your life to be like, and that's what you want your community to be like. We've had enough of a taste of this to know that what Paul's saying here is true. So this year, as we embark on the year, let's just make that our reality. Let's strip back some of the stuff that, like the Corinthians, has become too important to us and has actually gotten in the way of love. We're committed to too many different people, or we're not connected enough to people, or whatever it might be that has gotten in the way of love. And just say, all right, God, will you help me develop a heart of love for people and just pursue whatever that looks like in relationship with my church family? Will you help us to have those honest conversations with each other? And may you use us to spur each other on toward love and good deeds, because that's when we become the we that we want to be. It's when we live a life based on love. So, what will that look like for you this year? Not my job to tell you. I'd like to. I think I know what everyone else should do, but I don't. But the cool thing is, God knows.